The ATO recently issued a practical compliance guideline regarding limited recourse borrowing arrangements, which have been up in the air for a little while. Joining me today to talk about what implications that has for SMSFs is NowInfinity Principal Grant Abbott. Welcome, Grant.
Hi, how are you, Darren?
I'm very well, thanks.
That's good.
So the guideline is PCG 2016/5. So what situation is it trying to address?
What has transpired over the years, and really a lot of it was driven by favourable rulings from the tax office, that obviously there is nothing within section 67A or the former sections in relation to the ability of a related party to lend. And if you have a look at the legislation, it simply says that a self-managed super fund can borrow provided it's in a trust and blah, blah, blah. And then what's gone from there is then there was some national tax liaison group meetings where the issue of having low or zero interest rate loans were raised, and we covered that in SMSF strategy days about 3 or 4 years ago. And out of those meetings it was essentially, well, first off, it didn't breach the sole purpose test or the arm's length test because the super fund was much better off by not having to pay that expense. The second one is that it wasn't treated as a contribution because a contribution actually had to be an increase in the underlying assets of the fund, and a decrease in an expense obviously doesn't have an impact in that. So it all looked rosy and dandy and all that sort of stuff. So everyone's going, well, this is awesome, and we've got the tax office signing off. So suddenly, because of the contribution caps, what happened is people saying, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go and buy a property. And effectively, they weren't necessarily buying a property. They would have their own business property, their farm or whatever, and they would transfer that into a self-managed super fund. They can only do so much by way of a contribution itself to be under the caps. And then the rest, what they would do, a related party loan at 1%, 2% or nil interest rate, 25 years, some have been 50 years, interest only, principal and interest only, payable at the end. So there was a whole lot of variations around that. So obviously there was a lot of money going in there, and Stuart Forsyth was, he left the office. I'm not sure whether it was before or after, but I've had a lot of chats with Stuart now because he's obviously out in private practice. But what transpired from there is that the tax obviously had to come in and start to attack it. And they attacked it that, and this is still something to this day that I really can't get a grasp on, is they said that the money flowing through the holding trust is not arm's length income because it should have been more than what it would be because you're not paying expense, which I always found difficult because the expense was always the super funds anyway. But anyway, so they've put this blanket out there. They've said, okay, well, this is the non-arm's length income basis. So now we've got a position whereby the Commissioner has given a couple of rulings, changed the whole thing, and then suddenly is making up his own rules as you go along. So it's virtually delegated legislation, which it hasn't been challenged as yet. So again, there's no conditions in terms of borrowing, but he's using the non-arm's length income rules for that. But notwithstanding that, the Commissioner's the Commissioner, and he said, well, we've got a whole lot of rules around property, we've got a whole lot of rules around shares. And the major problem that most people are going to face, because I don't really mind it to any great extent, for property is like 15 years, 70% LVR, which to me is lower, so on and so forth. They're not that difficult to contain from, say, future related party loans. The problem that people are going to face with is Commissioners come out, and it's now March, end of March, and it's said that if, like the income this year, but if it hasn't been refinanced or terminated by 30 June 2016, that effectively is going to apply the non-arm's length income rules. He won't apply it beforehand, but it'll now start to apply it. And that gives you like a 3-month gap to either get it commercially refinanced. We'll talk about all of this on the SMSF Strategies Day, or look at peer-to-peer lending potentially. But to get that over the line in such a short period of time, or even terminate it, where you're going to have to transfer assets out of the super fund back into it, back into the original person's hands, because quite often the contribution cap's already been taken up. it's a pretty tight time frame, and I can imagine there won't be many people out there very happy with this. And my understanding is that the industry's really been negotiating with Commission around this, and if they are, I just think it's disgraceful personally.
You mentioned some of the things like the LVR ratio. There's 2 safe harbours, I believe, that came through these guidance, this compliance guidance initiative. But what are some of the others? They've stipulated you can't do 0 interest rates.
Yeah, no, they've actually set down an interest rate, which is, it's actually the Reserve Bank lending rate, so residential lending rate, which is about 5.7% at the moment. But so that'll be variable. So you can't do fixed interest. It looks as though you almost have to do, I think they do talk about fixed interest, but only for a 5-year period, otherwise you've got to use variable. 70% LVR for commercial, and presumably in commercial would equal rural and also residential, so it's one flat rate. Whereas if you go to bank, because they also have the override, is to say these are safe harbour, but if you can show us a commercial lender is doing something different in the marketplace, then we'll accept that one, which I think is quite interesting, because commercial lenders are probably about that rate anyway, because that's generally the rate they're borrowing at. 70% LVR, you actually have a look at, usually with a rural loan, it's 50%, probably commercial is 65, maybe 70, and then you have a look at residential, which is 80%. So from that, I don't know why the Commissioner chose 70%, and that's where a lot of the problem's going to be, not going down the future. I don't think there's a drama about that, because anyone who's going to do a new related party loan, you just go and find out what Westpac or St George or someone's doing, find out what the best ones are using, just use their terms and conditions. So don't necessarily worry about the Commissioner's safe harbour. It's going to be, again, that refinancing and everything that has to be done within the next 3 months. It's just simply not practical, it's impossible, and it's going to create a huge problem for a lot of people, because a lot of people can't, they just won't be able to pull out. Like if you've got 15, let's say you've got a property that's got $5 million worth of in there, you're allowed to have 70% LVR, which is okay. But if the property hasn't increased in price over that period of time, you haven't got the ability to transfer that equity out, so you haven't got cash or whatever. The only way out is actually to end up doing a JV with the members or whoever the lender is. We've got a lot of agreements there, and we're putting in place a lot of these anyway through NowInfinity Legal and NowInfinity. But again, it's just that time frame is really tough. I think it would have been preferable if you'd given us another year.
Is there any, I know this has only just been issued and just been released, but is there any indication that potentially they might revise that? Because as you say, it's an extremely tight timetable to fit with.
Well, I'm having a meeting tonight at the Board of Directors of the SMSF Members Association. We're certainly going to make submissions there, because a lot of our members are obviously impacted. As opposed, it's funny because no one ever asked us what our view was. They went to the professionals. Our members are impacted. Yeah. It's not the professionals, because quite often the professionals don't have a related party loan. So from us, it's going to be, I think we'll obviously lobby there. We probably won't go to the tax office. We'll go obviously to the government and just say it's extremely unfair, because there are a lot of farms that have been put into self-managed super funds for common sense family purposes. Yeah. You know, bankruptcy, warehousing, estate planning, rather than simply going in to put in a related party loan. And for many of these people, they don't mind paying a commercial rate of interest, but that LVR issue is going to create a bit of havoc for them. But we'll be taking it on, and I would say that there's a lot of people who are personally involved, that are pretty heavy hitters. And again, this is just an issue the Commissioner's come out. At some point in time, someone will probably stand up to the Commissioner, and it'll end up going through the courts and the AAT and that. So, you know, that's going to be watch this space, but we'll see. But effectively, he's done the right job, and he's knocked the nail on the head in terms of related party loans. And it is beneficial. A lot of people are complaining about it, but it's only the people, to me, who are in there at the moment, that's where the concern is. The ones who are outside, who are just going into it now, it's virtually said, well, it's on for all square and fold. Here's your safe harbour, you're down there, but show us a commercial, all there. So it's certainly given the big tick to related party lending.
So does this guideline mean that it's not really possible, or certainly not really prudent, to operate or to employ an LRBA outside of the parameters that the guidelines have actually stipulated now?
No, because the Commission's come back. Remember, the whole parameter is that he's using not the sole purpose test, he's using the non-arm's length provisions of the Tax Act. So it's nothing to do with the SIS Act. He's actually saying it meets all the conditions. So if you breach these rules, your fund's not going to be non-complying. So he's already said it's complying. What it means is that you're going to have to pay extra taxes, extra income taxes on what this deemed rate that he comes up with. So the safe harbour is, well, this is what the case is. Otherwise, what we'll do is you show us that it is arm's length, and the way to do that is through a commercial agreement. It's quite interesting when he puts in his safe harbour, you don't have to give personal guarantees, which banks generally do, which enables them to go higher LVR. So you might go from 70 to 80 or even higher. So depending on what you're doing, you can do a bit of a shop around there. But look, I think safe harbour's good, still do commercial, and I think there's a lot of vagaries in between.
The fact that the ATO is now issuing guidelines like this, and this is purely speculative, but do you think this is an indication that any of the questions around whether or not LRBAs would actually be outrightly banned have been quashed now?
Yeah, look, well, the ATO is being pragmatic and has probably seen that that the zero interest rate or the low interest rates have really been de facto contributions with a pullback. Whether it's going to hold up in law, we don't know, because it needs to be tested. Because I always wonder, well, if it's an expense issue, how is it going to be non-arm's length income? But it doesn't matter, we'll see what it is. But effectively, it's knocked it on the head to start off with. But as you said, the Commission's given us a guideline saying, well, he's created this, as you said, a safe harbour or a further one that if you follow up with a bank. So it does give us some consistency. So he's operating on the assumption, I can't say that it's never going to get rid of these related party loans or LRBAs, but I think certainly the quantum that's out there at the moment, there's no justification for getting rid of LRBAs because they are pretty hard beasts to run. One of the areas that I believe which should be quite interesting is to see, and we're looking at this in the SMSF Strategies Day, how the peer-to-peer lending then starts to operate on that. Because again, if you're in there and you want a 90% LVR, but we as investors will give you 90% LVR, we're not related to you anyway, but that now becomes the commercial rate for that. So again, the Commissioner's ruling is actually going to get disrupted. So it's an interesting scenario.
Okay, well, thanks very much for explaining all of that, Grant.
Thank you.